Good morning, everyone. I'd like to dedicate today's Mishna memory of my mother, Mrs. Shalamis Rabinowitz, Shalamis Bas Yaakov Eliezer. We're in Mishna Meiser Sheni, Perek Hey, Chapter 5, Mishnah Dal, Mishnah 4. Previously, we learned that when it comes to redeeming Meiser Sheni, meaning we have the sanctified Meiser Sheni produce, and then we want to transfer its sanctity onto money, that we need to evaluate what we're redeeming. And actually, one expert, like one merchant who sells fruits, would be able to tell you the value to know how much you need to redeem it for. Actually, if we learned previously the fruit was starting to spoil, then it's harder to evaluate it, and then you need three experts to be able to evaluate it. Now the question is going to be regarding evaluating net the Revai, the fourth year the Revai, the fourth year produce that we say also has to be redeemed. How do you evaluate it? How is that done? So the Mishnah reads, Ketzad paid net the Revai. How do we redeem our fourth year produce? The answer is Meniach es hasal. You place a basket that has the fruit that you want to redeem in it, al pi shloisha, in front of three experts, three people who know well how to evaluate. Now we'll see soon why you need three here. V'omer, and he says now to them, Kama adam reitza liftais loy besela. How much would a person want to buy this basket of fruit for a sela, which is a coin? That is an example that the Mishnah is using. It doesn't have to be this, but it's using a sela, which is a large coin. With the consideration that he will have to put out the money from his own pocket to take care of it. Which means like this. It means that when you calculate the value of Revai for redemption, you include in the calculation how much you have to spend in taking care of it. You know, there is expenses for hoeing around the trees, guarding the fruit against thieves, picking the fruit. These are expenditures. They come out of your pocket. You actually will be able to include those expenditures in the redemption value of these fruits. So, for instance, the example they give down here is the following. If a person would pay a selah for 4 baskets of this kind of fruit after it is picked, okay, a dinar a basket, right? So if a person would pay a selah for 4 baskets of this kind of fruit after it is picked, he will pay a selah only for 5 baskets of the same fruit if he buys it when it is still growing, and he has to pay to finish it himself. Okay, again. He will pay a selah only for 5 baskets of the same fruit if he buys it when it is still growing and he has to pay to finish it himself. The reason that it costs him an extra dinar to pay for that work. Revai fruit that has already been picked is therefore assessed at the rate of 5 baskets of selah, not 4. In this way, the owner is compensated for the dinar expenses he had in finishing the fruit. Okay, so even if we know that, if a person would go ahead and buy this fruit that's already picked, he'd pay 4 baskets per selah. But in our case, where there is, but we actually also are going to evaluate the expenditures involved and how much it took to take care of this fruit before it was picked. And therefore, the evaluation could come out to be that it cost a dinar for the purposes of taking care of this fruit. And therefore, at the end, for one selah, right? For one selah, it will go. 1 second, I say dinar selah. I meant the selah. It may cost them a selah. I'm sorry. All right, sorry. It's a dinar a basket. I apologize. Right, a selah is 4 dinar. It's a dinar a basket. But now that he is going to be including, meaning that he can now take off, or so to speak, he can take off the expenditures for taking care of this fruit. Therefore, it'll now come out that since it cost a dinar to take care of it, he actually would now, it would come out that he would be buying for a seller 5 baskets. Okay. When seller would only get him 5 baskets, because of the fact that he's also including, right? It's set with one seller for 5 baskets because of the fact that it's including the extra dinner for taking care of the fruit. So the point by the Meiser Sheni is that in the value of its redemption, we take into account the cost that it takes to take care of this fruit before you pick it. And therefore, being that that's included in the value, so your dinar will now go for more because we're including the cost for taking care of the fruit. Now, we can only talk about the expenses, including the expenses for taking care of it, once the fruits become big enough to be considered a fruit. The ones he has before this time are not considered. The sanctity of Ravai only actually takes place on a fruit, on the fruits while it's still connected to the tree, but only once these fruits become big enough to be considered a fruit. Doesn't exactly explain what that amount is, but it does work with the amount of once it's called a pri. It's got to be large enough to be called a pri, to be called a fruit. That is when you can start deducting the expenses that it took to take care of it. So this idea of including into the value the cost of the taking care of these fruits is only the cost of it once it's considered a fruit, once it becomes a pri, once actually the fruits become sanctified with the sanctification of Ravai of the 4th year. All right, now after that calculation is made, he puts down money, and he says, whatever we collected from here, shall be redeemed onto these monies, based on the calculation of so many and so many baskets per seller. You can't redeem Meiser Sheni until it comes off. Now, what this person is, he apparently has some of the fruits have already been picked, or maybe for the fruits have already been picked. So he's able to go ahead and show it to the experts to be able to make the calculation needed, but there's going to be more picked, there's going to be more baskets, and you don't need to have to go ahead and evaluate each basket because we assume that all the fruits are going to be the same. But you have more fruits that are going to be redeemed, that still have to be picked and will be picked. And so therefore, what you do is you put down money, you set aside money, based on the amount of fruit that you're planning on redeeming. You put down the money and you say that whatever will be picked, once it's picked, its sanctification will be transferred or redeemed onto the money based on the calculation of the experts of so many and so many baskets per seller. And with that calculation, he will now go ahead and putting down that money so that the redemption takes place whenever they're picked. You have that value, you have that calculation of the value to figure out how much money you have to put down for the purposes of redeeming it. And again, that value can only be assessed by 3 experts. Continue with the laws of Lashon Harah, chapter from the Chavetz Chaim, chapter 6, Sif Yud Aleph, paragraph 11. He just mentioned that the Torah gives us permission to take into consideration Lashon Harah that we hear in case it could be relevant for us or for others. Relevant in the sense of protecting yourself, protecting others. There are many things that people do mistakenly, they stumble in regard to this concept of taking into consideration. There's really much to talk about. Now is not the place to go into length about it. In the very last chapter of the Chavetz Chaim, he says, I will write about this at length. But the rule is, that which they say that we can take consideration this negative report. That is only to guard himself from, it's only to guard himself the person being discussed, being talked about. But God forbid to do any kind of act, or to actually cause any kind of damage, or embarrassment because of this, large or small, even if this bad report came out through a kosher witness, who testified regarding this in Bezdin, in a rabbinical court, the only thing that helps for is to obligate the person being testified against about to have to swear about what's been testified about him. Meaning, if there's some kind of a monetary issue, there's some kind of dispute, right? So one witness comes and says, "Yeah, he stole," or "Yeah, he owes the money. He shouldn't be denying." Well, one witness can't force the person to pay, but he can only force the person to swear to swear that he's not obligated. But again, it doesn't help you to go ahead now and act against him. The Bezdin can now force him to swear, but anybody else who may have heard about this has no right to act upon it. Even to dislike the person because of what you've heard is forbidden. Meaning you're taking into consideration there's going to be a lot of dislike this person. And all the more so, you can't, based on this, exempt yourself through this negative report about the person from obligations that you have. Now, on the bottom here in the footnote, the Chavetz Chaim has a very interesting example of this. So again, he's saying that this idea of lachash, keep it into consideration, can't be abused. It's very, very limited in how it can be used. It's only limited for the sake of protecting yourself or protecting others, because maybe there's a chance of this, but in no way can you, as he just said, dislike the person. In no way can you hurt the person based on that. And in no way can you exempt yourself from your obligations to this person. So he writes, give you one of what people stumble on. There are people in the city that are known, that have been considered poor, and because of that, there's an obligation to give them tzedakah, to give them money, to support them. Now it comes out that one person got up and said about them, they're not really poor. They're faking it. They're swindlers, they're con artists, and they're doing so by pretending to be poor. Now, that's one person saying that about them. Now, based on this rumor that's going around, now people stop giving the set amount that they were giving until now. Based on Torah law, this is a terrible wrongdoing. If you act upon what you heard, that is considered accepting Lashon Harah. Because if he's following the halacha, that all you can do is just take it into consideration. You can't exempt yourself from this poor man. Until we prove otherwise, he remains in a chazaka. That means he remains in his previous established status, and you have to continue supporting him. Okay, even bigger than this, our sages say, a person walks up and says, sustain me, and you don't have to now investigate him. And you give him. How much you give him is a different discussion, but you give him. All the more so, if we're talking about a person that until now has been considered poor, should his status change? The and the obligation of the people of the city towards this person, because of this person who spread this rumor, Rak tzarech, meaning the example he's giving it is a city where actually there is a power to put upon everybody X amount of money to give for the needy. And now they're on a stop, and they're stopping it because, hey, they heard about this about him. Right? What you can do based on this, when you say take into consideration, is to investigate. But until it's been proven, they're not permitted to exempt themselves from their obligation of tzedakah. And this is what our sages are talking about when they say regarding a pasuk that reads, do not steal from the poor, for he is poor. It's talking about a person who you gave, you were a regular contributor to this poor man, and then he stops, and he doesn't give him. You're called stealing from him. Meaning the Torah looks at a person, if you've been giving tzedakah to a poor person, and then you stop without a good reason for it, the Torah calls that stealing from him. What do you mean stealing? It's not his money, it's my money. But the Torah considers it as if you're stealing because you're supposed to give this money to him. So if you basically stop fulfilling your obligation to this poor man, the Torah calls that stealing, then that means just because somebody's spreading a rumor about a poor person doesn't give you the right to stop. In a case, for instance, where you want to take a person in as a partner, you're not obligated to take him as a partner. So there, the situation, you can go ahead and say, I'm not getting involved in order to protect myself, right? Basically, the point is, lachush, take into consideration for the possibility says you don't have to get involved. But to go ahead and now exempt yourself from an obligation based on that you can't do. And therefore, one has to be very careful that just based on what somebody tells you, which you can't accept, and all you can do is consider the possibility, that can be used again to protect yourself from getting involved in some kind of damage regarding something that, again, it's just a question of getting involved in. But to go ahead and exempt yourself from an obligation, or to go as far as to cause some kind of hurt or embarrassment to this person based on that of course you can't do. Okay, stop here. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.